Welcome back to Fast Market on the TD Ameritrade Network. I'm Tom White, joined by my co-host Kevin Hinks. But let's bring in our next guest for our cash tag segment. That's going to be Megan Brantley, Vice President of Research at LikeFolio. Welcome back to the show, Megan.
Thanks for having me, guys. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday is right. So look, we're talking home improvement, Home Depot, this duopoly with Lowe's. But Home Depot has been under pressure, down about 23% this year. It seems like people have put off buying or remodeling, but their pro services is still doing well. You still can't find somebody to come work on your house at this point. So demand's out there, but what kind of data are you guys seeing from LikeFolio that would basically say, hey, people are coming back and buying because lumber prices are starting to come down and inflationary pressures may have peaked?
Yeah, whenever we look at Home Depot, it's really difficult not to kind of loop them into Lowe's just because the two are so synonymous with each other. And we're actually starting to see a pretty stark divergence in performance with the two companies. When we look at Home Depot, we see actually consumer demand rising, not by an extreme amount. It's up about 3% year over year, but it's nice to see signs of positive demand growth for us. In contrast, when we look at Lowe's, we see that demand falling pretty significantly, almost double digits year over year. And so, there's this split in demand. And then second, whenever we look at overall levels of consumer happiness, Home Depot, whenever we look at total mentions, it has a higher mention volume, but it's also got a higher consumer happiness score. And you can see that split between Home Depot's and Lowe's on this scatter chart. That is now, that gap's about 4 points. This used to be the opposite. We used to see Lowe's higher than Home Depot when it came to overall consumer happiness levels. And so it's interesting to start to see this kind of separation in performance, at least from a consumer's mindset, and an increasing preference for consumers and for those people who are shopping that, they're turning to Home Depot versus a Lowe's. I think a lot of this is driven by just the nature of how these companies are set up, in the sense that Lowe's is a lot more targeted to this DIY consumer, people who are, planning on maybe doing these home renovations themselves. I think that 75% of their sales are driven by this type of a consumer, versus Home Depot, where they're more split evenly, about 50-50 between the pros and the professional consumers. So whenever we look at these overarching trends, we do see sustained strength in mentions from consumers who are talking about hiring a contractor. Those are about 25% higher year over year. We don't necessarily see any softening on a quarter over quarter basis. It's pretty much flat. But in contrast, we are starting to see some signs of weakness just from the DIY consumer. For those home renovation mentions, those are off by about a point year over year. So it's interesting to see the split, but it's also nice to see this in alignment with trends that we would expect.
Megan, that's exactly what I wanted to hit on here, which is we're seeing housing data come out, and the housing data continues to get weaker and weaker. The remodeling market index just came out for the second quarter, down 10 points, but it's still 77, and anything over 50 is a good number, but it's down 10 points. So everything is softening, but what you're saying is they're still maintaining, and if there's a battle between Home Depot and Lowe's, Home Depot's clearly winning it. The whole market is softening. That's going to affect Home Depot in a way, but can they make that up by beating out on Lowe's? I mean, you're right, they have a balance between do-it-yourself and pros. They do a great job with that, but as these numbers come down, should people be concerned about both these companies, frankly?
I think that the bar, especially for Home Depot, it may be a little bit lower than where it was, say, a year ago. I think a lot of this is somewhat expected, especially heading into this event. But long term, this is something that we'll watch to see, is this just a major drop off in these home renovation mentions? And we're not necessarily seeing that. I do think, though, one note, whenever you look at this chart, these are mentions of people who are talking about shopping at Home Depot. And this is kind of the only sign of a potential red flag in our data. And that's if you look at that far bar on the right, it's kind of shaded that quarter three. And now we're only about 2 weeks in, but you can see that bar, that pace is much lower than the quarter that they just capped off. So for us, when we look at this, we see, okay, that quarter two looks really strong. We saw demand growth. We saw sentiment improvements. We're seeing strength. And then now in the first few weeks of August, we're seeing some signs of weakness. It's really, really early to tell. Will this be sustained? Or will this kick back up heading into the fall season? But it's definitely something that we're monitoring. But because of this, whenever we approach this from an earnings perspective, we generate these scores weekly so we can track these earnings scores over time to understand how things are going. And right now we have a pretty bullish outlook on Home Depot. Actually, our score's coming in around 45, but it's actually dropped in the past 2 weeks. It used to be over 50. So we're starting to see some tempering, but still a positive outlook. Like we still expect Home Depot to have a strong report this quarter, but there could be some interesting nods to guidance moving ahead if this bar is indicative of a little bit of waning consumer demand.
Yeah, there it is, Tom. It's the guidance.
That's the key thing. Right. You guys, with the last couple of weeks, starting to see that kind of flip over. Maybe we get that narrative from the company on guidance moving forward. But I think historically, this quarter is one of their slowest after that big buildup in the spring season. But Megan, as far as the hiring a contractor versus home renovation, it seems like houses aren't selling as quickly. They stay on the market for a little bit longer. Home prices have not come down. So it seems like if that whole advent of people moving over the last 2.5 years is starting to come to a stop, hiring a contractor still up 25% on this 30-day moving average that you have for that. Is that the saving grace for them? Because Home Depot crushes Lowe's as far as the pro contractor business, and that's where they make quite a bit of their margins.
Yeah, I do think that this is Home Depot's their edge right now, especially in this current environment, is, maybe people aren't moving as much, but people who are sticking around because interest rates are so high, they're going to invest in their existing home. And maybe this is a more affluent buyer that's able to hire contractors and have these renovations done. They're not going out to try to do it themselves. They're ready to bring in a professional and upgrade the existing house that they're in. And so that's definitely something that Home Depot has going for it. And just that overall balance in the pro versus DIY consumer makes it a little bit more stable in our eyes. So, if we were to pick a winner heading into this earnings week, we definitely would pick Home Depot as our winner versus Lowe's. We don't actually have any type of meaningful earnings trade for Lowe's. For us, we're pretty neutral for that name. So this is one that, if you're looking to bet on a horse, if you will, I think that Home Depot is the one for us that is leading in terms of overall levels of consumer sentiment and those macro trends that we're tracking.
So pummeling Lowe's once again. Lowe's trying to catch up, but they just can't seem to do it. Home Depot is the winner, according to LikeFolio. All right, great stuff as always, Megan. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
All right, that's Megan Brantley, Vice President of Research at LikeFolio.